All right. Well, welcome everybody. I imagine that many of you in the audience have already heard of Polina or familiar with her work. But for those of you who haven't, or if anyone needs a refresher, Polina is the founder of The Profile, which is a new media company that features awesome long-form profiles of successful people and companies every week. It's a great read. Highly recommend signing up if you aren't already. Before that, she spent 5 years at Fortune, where she was the author and editor of Term Sheet, which is a deal-making newsletter. She's interviewed some of the most influential people in the industry, like Stephen Schwartzman, Belinda Gates, Steve Cates, Chamath, Alexis Ohanian. And she started her career at CNN and USA Today, so in the more traditional media world. And I think we're gonna talk about all of that today and much more. Polina's an awesome speaker. The last time she came and spoke to the On Deck Writer Fellowship, it was one of the most practical, actionable talks we ever had. So really excited to be chatting with her again today.
You're a great moderator, Max.
It's the secret to being a great moderator is to just flatter your guests. So that's my first tip for anyone in the audience.
Yeah, I'll send that intro to my mom. She'll be happy.
if you want to just put me directly on the line with her, I'm happy to. Happy to do it straight from the source.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much, Max. And thanks again, Polina, for being here with us today. I'm going to kick it off with a first question. As an immigrant myself, I would like to take us back in time. I understand you are an immigrant from Bulgaria originally, and when you first landed in the United States, you could not even speak English. So I would love to hear from you to share about your early years transitioning from a life in a different country to the United States.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I'm sure you'll relate to a lot of this, but basically, my parents, I was born in Bulgaria, and at the time, they won something called the green card. They had a green card lottery in Bulgaria, and it's totally random. I think like a few people, I don't know, like maybe 100 people or something like that win it every year. If you don't win it, you apply again next year. So my dad was obsessed with the idea of the United States, or like Canada and Australia. Those were his, second and third choices. The U.S. was like the dream. So he actually ended up winning in 1999, and it took about a year of interviews and vetting. Even though it's a random lottery, you still have to interview to prove that you're not just gonna come to the United States and be a criminal. So they look at your work history. Do you know anybody in the United States that could make sure you're not homeless when you come here, and all that stuff? We didn't know anybody. I think my grandfather's cousin's friend knew some people here, so he connected us, and we paid him some money, and they were like, sure, we'll welcome you at the airport, basically, and tell them that you're going to be living with us. That was about it. And then, to me, I was in second grade in Bulgaria, and failing math, but really good at the writing and the reading and all that stuff. So my parents were like, all right, so we're moving to America. And in my head, I literally thought Mickey Mouse was going to welcome me at the airport. I was like, I'm going to Disney World. That's what the United States meant to me as an 8-year-old. But we got here, we moved to Atlanta, Georgia, because that's where the people of my grandfather's cousin's friend were. And my fate was sealed. So I grew up in Atlanta. In the beginning, it was really hard because, like you said, I didn't speak English, but I found that a lot of times your biggest insecurities actually drive you to overdo it, in a sense that I couldn't read and write, and that's how I used to love doing that in Bulgaria. That's how I express myself. So to know that I was worse at that than all my classmates just drove me through. When I became so good, I became better than them. I think it's like that with a lot of immigrants. Just find what they're good at now, like what they're a master at. It was probably an insecurity at one point. But I just, I grew up in Atlanta, went to the University of Georgia, and truly moved for the first time to New York in 2014.
Gotcha. You must be excelling at the university. It seems like which got you into working for some of the most prestigious media companies, right?
I wouldn't say I excelled. By the way, I see Austin here in the audience. He also went to the University of Georgia. What's up, Austin? But anyway, so I wouldn't say I was a good student. Like I did well because I avoided any and all math classes. But where I truly excelled, I think, was the newspaper. The University of Georgia has a really great journalism school. You have to apply and be accepted, but I spent most of my time skipping class and working at the newspaper, which was independent of the university. And that's where I actually learned, because you can only learn so much with the theory of journalism. Like, that's where you learn ethics and like how to write a good article and the structure. But then you actually get to apply it by working at the newspaper. And that's where it was a daily newspaper when I joined. Literally, I would go there after class at maybe 2 p.m. and stay until 10 p.m. every day. So I think experience-based learning is way more important than anything you'll do in class.
Gotcha. Well, that's cool. And then you started your first full-time job, I believe, at CNN, right? And then from there, you kind of went on to work at a couple of other big institutions like USA Today and then Fortune as your last employer. Could you tell us about your journey working in those big media institutions and your takeaways from them?
Yeah, you know what's really funny? Anytime somebody looks at my resume or my LinkedIn, it looks really flashy, but the truth is it's not at all, actually, because when I graduated from Georgia in 2013, nobody was hiring reporters. I think the only job offer I got, because at the time, every few years there's a cycle of layoffs, and all these media organizations that I wanted to work at were laying people off. They weren't hiring new people. The big craze was social media managers and community management, all that stuff. So I was applying as a reporter. Nobody wanted to hire me at the time. I think the only job offer I got within like the first year was at a small, tiny newspaper in South Georgia. That my annual salary it was the dream job. It was education reporter at this newspaper, and my salary would be $19,000 a year. And it was in a tiny place, and I just knew, I was like, I'm 20, I think 1 or 2 years old at the time. I'm gonna have no social life. I don't know anybody. Nobody's here basically, and I would just live in that newsroom for what? And so my whole life, I've always wanted to be a small fish in a big pond rather than a big fish in a small pond. So to me, like, New York, that's where media happens. Like, that's where I wanted to be. But I kept applying to jobs and nobody was really hiring. So I had interned at USA Today and CNN. So it was around Christmas. By the way, if you're ever looking for a job, emailing people around Christmas and the holidays is a great time, because I was like, hey, I know you guys are going on vacation. I know you need help. I will literally do whatever you need. So CNN, my old intern boss there was like, sure, like, we'll hire you on a freelance basis. You're a contractor. You can come here and we'll find stuff for you to do. I was literally basically a robot. I was on the wires desk. And what I did was CNN, basically Turner, they own a bunch of smaller market TV stations. And whenever something happened in like Oklahoma, I would find that TV station, take their video and bring it into the CNN main like network. It was just, I mean, honestly, truly a machine could have done my job, but I was just thankful to be there. And I weaseled my way into writing a few articles. So I was doing that, and then at the same time I was freelancing for USA Today. So because CNN was based in Atlanta, from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., whenever they needed me, I would go there in person and work, then drive home, and from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. I worked remotely for USA Today doing social media. And I did that for about a year. So after I graduated, that holiday season until the next year. Living at home on my mom's couch, I was the cliche. But now when people look at that, they're like, oh, CNN and USA Today, that's so prestigious. Like, it really wasn't. But working at CNN told me, like, I knew I did not want to work for a cable news network. Like, any sort of TV news, that was not for me. I really liked writing, and I liked the depth of reporting you can do by writing. So I basically kept applying through that whole time and got a job at Aussie Media, which is a media startup in New York. Actually, no, it's based on the West Coast, but I was in the New York office. I was there for 6 months because they wanted to shut the New York office. I was like, I literally took this job to be in the New York office. So I started applying again. And then I got the Fortune job by literally, I saw they were hiring. I was so desperate, but Fortune is an amazing place. So I looked up editors on Twitter, and I guessed their emails. I was like, it's probably their first name, period, last name at fortune.com. Like, what else could it be? So I sent my resume to all of them, and I said I applied through the main channel, but, like, you know, here's my resume now. And they were like, who the hell is this girl? And I stayed at Fortune for the last 5 years.
Wow, that's amazing. You know, it seems like you have such a great, like, workaholic, you know, almost like philosophy. It seems like you've always worked on multiple jobs, and I know, like, even when you were working in Fortune, you started the profile on the sideline, and you kept that going as a sideline hobby for a couple of years. Like, what made you to do that?
Yeah, so, okay, and by the way, I see Lucinda's here. Lucinda is the person who now writes term sheet for Fortune. She does it every single morning. You should subscribe if you haven't. It's a beast of a newsletter. Like, you don't understand how much work goes into that thing on a daily basis until you actually sit down and have to do it, and then do it again the next morning. But so I was at Fortune. I loved my time there. I started as a social media person. Then I became a reporter, and then I started writing Term Sheet, which is the daily newsletter. But so I started the profile, which is my current newsletter, in February of 2017, so exactly 4 years ago. And the reason I started it is because I was actually a little bored at Fortune. At the time, I was put on a beat of covering large, like, tech companies. So, like, it was like Uber, Lyft, Snapchat, like Facebook. I didn't have many sources there. That's not what I was used to covering. I was covering more of the startups before then. So, I mean, it was fine, but I had a little bit more time, like, in my life after work. So I was like, I'm going to start something that's just for me. And that was the profile. I was already reading these long form profiles, and I was like, it's just going to be a conversation starter for family and friends if I put all of these articles that I read in an email and just send it to them. And so I started that in February of 2017 when I had all the time in the world. And then August of 2017 came, and Fortune was like, hey, we have an opening here for the writer of Term Sheet. It's a daily newsletter. Do you want to do it? And because I don't know how to say no, I said yes. And it was only supposed to be temporary at first. They were supposed to find somebody else for it. That never happened. So I stayed for 2 years. So for 2 years, you have to understand that I was writing a newsletter Monday through Friday, every morning. Then I was writing my newsletter, the profile, on weekends and after work and on the subway. So that I wrote the bulk of it on Saturday, and then I sent it on Sunday. So technically the only day of the week that I was not sending a newsletter to strangers on the internet was Saturday. But I loved it. Like, if you had ever told me, like, you get to read and write for a living and people will pay you for that, like, I would do that. That's my dream job, right? So I couldn't complain, and I still can't complain, but it is interesting how I left Fortune last year to do the profile full time, but it is amazing how when you put your full time and energy into something, I mean, how different life is.
That's awesome. Sorry, I think I have my cat occasionally trying to co-host with you, Polina.
No worries.
Yeah, well, that's such a wonderful journey. That's the thing. I think my takeaway is I totally resonate with you. Like when you just look at someone's resume, it may look flashy and all smooth sail, but underneath that, there were quite some stories and ups and downs of each and every step, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so which brings us to the current almost, right? So I know you literally started your own the profile, your own newsletter business the first day when the pandemic hit. My understanding is it was such a coincidence. But in any ways, it's a big step for you, and I believe you're the first time founder, right? So tell us about that. What triggered that to happen, and how do you like it so far?
I love it, but it was a huge step, because if you had asked me when I was starting at Fortune, I literally would have told you I would spend the rest of my life at that company. To me, that was like the ultimate dream. You get to write for a magazine, and it's interesting, and it's smart people. Every day you're surrounded with like some of the most talented journalists ever. So to me, that was the dream. To my parents, it was a safe, secure job, that where they pay me nicely, and I have benefits and whatever, health insurance. But over time, that changes. So for me, I think, I'm a relatively observant person. It's very hard to argue what's happening in the media industry right now. You look at it and you just see the wind blowing in one direction and media companies turning a blind eye. And I'm just nervous that what happened with the internet and how that took away a bunch of revenue is going to happen again. I think working on Term Sheet, the one thing that I learned is that people trust people. So many of the readers that I interacted with on a daily basis didn't go to fortune.com first thing in the morning, but they opened that email because they trusted the person who was writing it, whether that was me, whether it's Lucinda, whether it was Aaron before me, or Dan Premack before her. Like, you form a special relationship with the person writing, and you get to have such interesting conversations. So at a time when you look at the surveys, trust in institutions, especially media companies, is at an all-time low, and that's why you're seeing the popularity of things like Substack and independent creators, et cetera. Of course, some of them are going to either get burnt out and stop sending their newsletters. Others are they're gonna come together and like create new media companies and things like that. But I just saw the wind blowing in one direction, and the more I thought about it, the more I read things that confirmed what I was seeing. So I started thinking about this in January of 2020, and at the time, COVID was not on my radar at all. So I read an article by Lee Jin. It was published in Andreessen Horowitz. It said like, forget 1,000 true fans, how about 100? The whole idea is, if you have 100 really loyal readers and you charge $100 a year, you're making 6 figures a year. That's not a bad living for a journalist, right? Or any sort of writer or whatever. So I started reading and I started thinking about it, and then everything I listened to, I was just like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And I came home, and I looked at the profile's growth. Until that point, until January of 2020, for 3 years, the profile had been free, completely free. And I had never missed a Sunday sending it. So my whole thing, Max knows this, I talk about this all the damn time, but when you make a promise to your reader that I will never miss a day, or I will never miss, whatever my cadence is with sending my newsletter. I will never break that promise to you. You will always receive this thing in your newsletter, even if the world is falling apart and there is a pandemic. Like, not even then. Because I think most of the time there's more excuses and more reasons why you shouldn't send it than why you should. So in January, I started thinking about these things, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to experiment with, I just want to know, is anybody willing to pay for this newsletter? When I was at Fortune, the only thing I did was write. I wasn't involved in the ad sales. I wasn't involved in the sponsorship conversations. I had no idea who was paying for the Fortune name and who was paying for me, the writer. So then I basically was like, I'm going to add 2 new sections to the profile called Audio to Hear and Videos to See. It's going to be curated podcasts, video interviews, documentaries with people that are interesting. And I'm just going to see who pays. I set the price at $100 a year and $10 a month. So, just curious. A bunch of people did pay, not as many as I thought, but the price was pretty steep. $100 a year is pretty steep. So then I got a bunch of feedback, and they said, Polina, I wouldn't pay 100, but I'd pay 50. And so I lowered it, and a bunch more people signed up. So, okay, so now I have this number, and I sat down and I did the math. I backed into how many paying members to the profile I would need to match my salary margin. According to my projections, based on my growth, I thought that was, I could reach that goal within a year. What I found out was it only took a few months, because once I left Fortune, I was able to do it 100% and with my time and attention and dedicate that to it. So it's obviously very, very good to be overly conservative in your projections, because you never want to be like, oh, I thought I was going to make all this money and now I'm not. You want to be like, okay, how much time and how many people do I need to get to reach this goal? So it's gone really well, but I think it's gone really well because I've literally, all my focus has gone into this thing since the day I left. And I told Fortune that I was leaving it was like the 1st or 2nd of March, or whatever that first week was. Still the pandemic was not on my radar. And then March 20th was my official last day, and it was also the first day of the lockdowns all over the country. And I had no idea what would happen. I was like, great, I just quit my job to do this. Who knows? But here's what I always say. For people who are like, oh, I can't leave my job to start my own thing because I'm nervous that it's not going to be safe and secure and whatever, that is the wrong way to think. When you're when somebody, you need to ask yourself, who is paying my bills? If you are at a job where you only have one revenue stream, and that one revenue stream is your salary, the second that you get laid off, you get fired for whatever reason, or something, God forbid, happens, you have now lost 100% of your revenue stream. When you are on your own, I made a list of all the ways I could make money because I was super nervous about it, right? Subscription revenue from subscriptions. I could do ads. I could freelance. I could license my content. I could do speaking. I could charge for speaking. I could do sponsorships. There's 6 other ways, 6 other revenue streams. So if one dries up, I still have the 5 others. So it's not as scary when you look at it that way. Alice, are you still there?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute.
No worries.
I was saying, Max, I know you have some big questions you didn't get to explore from yesterday's session. You want to ask them right now? Max, I guess maybe you're on mute. All right. We have someone. we can. Well, someone raise a hand. Maybe we'll ask Alvin to come here first.
Let's do it.
Okay, Alvin, your turn.
Oh, what's up,
Hey,
Alvin?
Polina, thanks for. Hey, good to see you. Quick question, okay? Essentially, how do you know if the content that you have is something that people would be willing to even read? In the sense, like, if you're just getting started, there's a lot of those like initial kind of like jitters where you're like, well, who wants to read what I have to say, or who wants to engage with my content? How do you get over that kind of nervousness and just self-doubt? And is there a market pretty much for everything, where there's always going to be a tribe that's willing to engage with what somebody is putting out there?
So I had the benefit of writing a newsletter, obviously for Fortune, but also having friends who wrote newsletters as businesses. So I was friends with the Morning Brew guys and also Market Snacks before they got bought by Robinhood. So I knew what a solid open rate was, what a solid click-through rate was. And I knew that the industry average was way, 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 way lower than what I had with the profile. And of course, my numbers were smaller, but I knew that the level of loyalty it wouldn't go away all of a sudden, right? And also, like, when you talk to people, right? So, like, I knew that I had never done proper marketing and advertising for the profile. It's all been done through social media and word of mouth. And I kept it that way because I knew that was the highest level of engagement. So a lot of people actually think that the profile is much, much bigger than it actually is, but I want to keep it that way because I want to grow organically for as long as I can before I kind of open up the net and everybody can sign up, because immediately your engagement goes down. But I think in the early days, you just have to know, like, where am I in relation to where the market is? And if your stuff is higher, then it's like, well, people want to read it, and obviously they're willing to pay for it. So you have to test along the way, because I would have never just like quit and been like, all right, let me just try. Like, I was always kind of iterating along the way.
Hey, I'm back. Sorry, I got trapped on mute. Was running into some Clubhouse bug and had to quit and relaunch. But I'm here, and I did want to jump in, Polina, with a couple other questions. So one thing, I mean, you've talked about your incredibly serious commitment to meeting the cadence that you've committed to meet to your readers, and in fact, I think, if I'm right, you've never missed an issue of the profile. If you have, please correct me. But
Never.
I'd love to hear about never. That's what I thought. So I'd love to hear about some of the like the weeks that were the most crazy, where it was like the hardest to actually power through whatever else was going on and get the newsletter out. But you still did. Like, what are some of the craziest situations through which you've written an issue?
Yeah. So, I mean, there have been so many. Like, one weekend, I had an international flight, and it didn't have Wi-Fi, but then I had like a layover, so I was finishing it, and then there was Wi-Fi at the airport. It was like a whole thing. Another time, I got married. Another time, I got COVID. Another time, like, I had to go back to Atlanta and like help my parents with something. There's always something. Like, every weekend, if I tell you like this is happening this weekend, there's always something going on. But what I've done is, like I told the on deck people, it's easier to slow down than speed up. So if you're like, I want to start a newsletter, but like I don't know how much time I'm willing to commit, start slower at first. Start once a month, and then maybe go down to once a week, or start once a week. Like, sending a newsletter every single day is really, really hard. Like, Lucinda, she can tell you with Term Sheet. I mean, there's some days you literally are so exhausted in the morning, and you're like, nope, still gotta write, because advertisers are gonna be pissed at me, readers are gonna be pissed at me, my editors are gonna be pissed at me. There's no way you're not sending that newsletter. So I think, so the the reason I say it's easier to slow down is to speed up rather than slow down is because you can always go faster, but don't let your reader down by being like, sorry, like I thought I was going to do this every day, but actually I'm a once a month kind of girl. And the cadence is super important because that's what builds the trust. And if I know it's coming every single the first of every month, I still know to look forward to it. It's all about having discipline and creating a habit for yourself, but also for the reader. Like the habit is the most important thing, because one time I had accidentally scheduled the profile to go out on the wrong day, and then didn't go out, and I got so many emails, like you would have thought I was dead. People were checking on me. They were like, is everything like okay? Like I understand. And it was just like, guys, it's literally 2 hours late, but you want that kind of loyalty and concern when it's not there.
I mean, that's the ultimate testament to having built that habit with your readers, and that consistency is that when it's not sent out, they don't think that you were just lazy. They're like, oh my God, like something must be horribly wrong.
Exactly.
This newsletter has been so consistent for so long. That's really amazing.
Sorry,
Okay.
One more point here. The reason the consistency is important is because when you eventually want to add a paying layer to it, you want to charge for your newsletter. It's 1,000 times easier to do it if you've been consistent, because suddenly the reader's like, oh, okay, if I give her my money, I know that Polina's not going to take it and run off to Mexico and never send the newsletter again. They've known that now for 3 years. I send it every single Sunday. Nothing's going to change if now they pay me for it.
100%. I know we have a bunch of audience questions, so I'm just going to take us down one more path, and then we'll hand it over to questions from people in the room. You've had a lot of really, really cool and awesome people promote your work, but I think at least one of my personal favorites is The Rock. So can you tell that story?
Yes, The Rock. Okay, so I love telling the story because it's actually like the lesson here is you can't plan success. I am such a control freak, and I think like I know what's good and I have great taste and I know what's going to do well on the internet. I never know. So The Rock was a perfect example of that, because basically, so let me just, I stole this from David Burrell. He told me that everything you write is basically a vehicle for serendipity. And what he means by that is, I learned this through Term Sheet 2. You send a newsletter and you think of like 2 people reading it. You never know who it's going to get forwarded to. You never know whose eyes it's going to get in front of. And basically, that's the beauty of writing in public and sharing your work with strangers. There's going to be a ton of criticism and feedback that comes with it, but you have no idea where it's going to end up, and that's the beauty of the internet. So with The Rock, I publish these profile dossiers every Wednesday, which are deep dives into an individual person. And I liked The Rock's story, and I was just curious about his life. I didn't know too much about it. And so I started working on it, but then I finished it. I was like, God, like, I don't think this is my best work. Like, my dossiers are normally super, super practical. So you can read one on Melinda Gates or Daniel Ek and be like, oh, okay, this is how he does his calendar. Like, it's super specific. But with The Rock, it was more motivational and inspirational than specific and tactical. So I was like, I don't think this is my best work. I don't think it's going to do that well on the internet. So I'm just going to schedule it for Christmas Eve when nobody's going to be opening their email and reading. But I published it then, thinking it was going to disappear. And I was on a walk with my dad, and I wasn't looking at my phone. And then I looked at my phone and I had missed calls, text messages, DMs. I was like, what the hell is going on? I thought I got like canceled for a second. I was like, I did something wrong. Hold on, let me look. And then I saw that The Rock, so basically I tagged him on Twitter. I tagged him sharing the post, and I guess he saw it, he read it, he liked it, he shared it 4 times on Twitter, once on Instagram to 200 million followers, and once on Facebook. So basically the whole point of this is like, you just never know who's looking at their mentions, who's checking, who's writing about me today. And that, I mean, that's one of my best performing dossiers to date.
So obviously getting promoted by The Rock is super exciting. How impactful was it in terms of actually getting you new subscribers?
Okay, so it's hard to tell. I didn't see as big of a bump as I thought it would bring. I think, and that's what I'm talking about when I say like word of mouth. It's much more impactful when people you forward the profile to somebody who would be interested in that. I think people saw his tweet, they saw he liked it. I got a ton of new Twitter followers, but not that many people actually clicked the subscribe link and whatever. But I was checking, and at one point there were like 1,000 people on my website at once on Google Analytics, and I was freaking out. I was like, this is gonna get so many subscribers. But actually, like, not that many people converted, but a lot of people read his post.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really interesting to highlight, because I talked to so many people who are, earlier on in their newsletter journey, and I think there's often this thought of like, well, if I could only get, this famous person or this person with a big audience to retweet my work, then I'd be like set. But really, I mean, The Rock must be one of the most followed people on Twitter, and your experience, I think, is a perfect illustration of the fact that there's truly nothing more valuable than that more personal, like, word of mouth, promotion between friends or acquaintances or people where there's trust, and that even The Rock's reach can't outpace that.
Exactly. Although I will say it helps, because some people need a lot of social proof on the internet before they decide to sign up for something. And I think having The Rock's like stamp of approval is, I mean, if that's not enough social proof for you, I don't know what is. But in that sense, it's been helpful.
We'll just wait until he becomes our president in 2028.
Oh my God, I can't wait.
Bigger stamp approval.
I will be his first voter.
All right. Well, I know we got a lot of people in the audience who want to ask questions, so let's hand it over to them. Alice, I'll let you go back to calling on people from the audience.
Sure. The next one, Julia. Why don't you fire up?
Hey, Polina.
Hi, Julia.
So I actually would love for you to share a couple of things with the audience, just because it really resonated with me. And you were talking about, getting, I guess it was this kind of story about, doing something that might seem scary, but it's not dangerous. And also kind of thinking of yourself as a brand when so many folks in media are tied to an existing established brand, but really kind of thinking of your own self, Polina, the profile as brands. Thank you so much.
Of course, that's such a good question. So one of the other things that kind of pushed me over the edge when I was thinking about making the decision to leave Fortune, because trust me, it was not an easy one. I would wake up and be like, yes, I'm ready. And then I'd go to sleep and be like, are you freaking crazy? You're never going to do it. So one thing I listened to a podcast with Jim Cook, who started Samuel Adams Beer, and he was working at BCG in like the 80s or the 90s. He was making $250K a year. He had a family, a nice job. It was cushy. It was comfortable. He never wanted to leave. Or no, he wanted to leave, but it was like the golden handcuffs, right? He couldn't. He was making so much money at the time. So he was like, I'm only going to move up from here. I'm only going to make more money. I people really like me. I do a good job. And internally he was like, oh, but I like really want to try this beer thing. Like, I'd really love to try opening up, starting my own beer company. And so he kept going back and forth on this decision. He was like, yeah, but if I leave, I might not make that much money. Like, it might actually fail. And what am I going to do? I have kids and a wife and a house. So basically he asked himself the question, is this decision scary or is it dangerous? And there's a really slight but important difference. When you're making decisions, like for me, I made a list of like, what am I scared of in leaving Fortune? And it was the stupidest list you've ever read, because it was like, I'll disappoint like someone. I have to tell my boss, like, I'm scared of that. I'm scared of whatever, of the uncertainty. And it's like, those are all things that, yes, are scary, but they're scary for 24 hours. You do it, and then maybe the worst happens. Maybe somebody yells at you, and they're like, how could you do this? Why would you ever leave? Okay, but then it's over. That's short-term scary. Long-term dangerous is when you're 70 years old and you look back and you're still at BCG and you're like, damn, I wonder if I had started that beer company, like what could have been, and like how cool would have that been, and what would I have learned? That's once you start thinking like that, like that framework changes a lot. And the other question I asked myself based off of that was, I've spent 5 years at Fortune magazine. If I stay another 5, will I have learned more or less than if I leave, do the profile, fail miserably, completely fall flat on my face with it? In 5 years, will I have learned more or less than I would have if I stayed at Fortune? And the truth is, I will have learned more even if I like made a complete fool of myself with the profile and it failed. So to me, when I feel like I'm not growing, I need to do something else. Like, it's not good for my mental health. So the whole idea is like, you just always want to put yourself in positions that give you optionality and that you optimize for growth and learning. And that's where I find it most exciting. And the other thing in terms of the brand, you have to do something for yourself outside of your day job. Like, I learned this lesson after college, but I made a promise to myself that I would never tie my entire identity around something external that I could lose, that somebody else was in charge with. Whether it's a relationship you can get broken up with real fast, whether it's a job they can fire you. Like, if you take your self-worth and you wrap it around something external that doesn't belong to you, it's a recipe for like disaster, and I knew that. So the best thing I did at Fortune was starting the profile while I was still there, because it allowed me to have an outlet for myself outside of my job. And in terms of the brand, now people know like Polina with the profile. But it doesn't matter. Like, even if I stop doing the profile, I'll still have an identity on my own. And I think that places like Forbes, for example, is recognizing that. Look at what they're doing with they're trying to entice writers to start newsletters under the Forbes brand, and I think they get equity or something. But like, they're recognizing the trend I was talking about earlier, that people trust people, not necessarily the brand. Yeah, the brand can give you distribution and it can help you with a lot of things, infrastructure, selling, advertising, etc. But it's very hard for a faceless brand to build a following and a personality, like to have a personality and to be human. So I think all these like newsletter writers at these traditional media companies, sooner or later, the best ones will realize that and be like, I could do this on my own.
Awesome. Well, if there are any of the BCG folks in the crowd, hope you're inspired. Our next one, Alex.
Hey, Alex. Alice and Max got the names mixed up. Thank you for hosting. And Polina, nice to finally meet you here. I know you're from Bulgaria, me too. So it's awesome to see people in the tech space. Yeah, for sure. I actually went to the University of Florida, so we had a little school rivalry with Georgia.
Wow. Nice. God, Bulgaria should be so proud.
Yeah. And I mean, kind of notorious right now, but the CEO of Robin Hood's from the same city I came from Varna.
Wow.
But no, that's awesome. So my question's like a little boring, but when you're scaling a newsletter, right, you're primarily writing it. Like, that's your bread and butter. Your skill set is to just put it into Google Doc or whatever. As you're scaling it, there's going to be more and more operational duties that start stacking up, like who's going to be uploading it, who's going to be pressing send. Is there any like low-hanging fruit you'd recommend people just to like handle as they're scaling their newsletter? Like maybe like, oh, this was a huge operational bottleneck for us, and here's what we did. It was just surprisingly easy. Or maybe if there's something along the lines of like, oh, we decided to move to Substack because XYZ versus hosting it through our own ESP or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great question. So people, the question I probably get all the time is, why would you do Substack? They take 10%. Why don't you just go do it yourself? And the truth is, I am not yet making $5 million a year where 10% is significant. I mean, it's meaningful. Like, don't get me wrong. I wish I had that 10%, but and another 3% that Stripe takes. But here's the thing. I sat down and I did the math, and I was like, okay, so if I have my own website and I'm hosting the thing, and then I have to sell, or I have to send it, and then the hosting fees, like all the fees, I did all the fees. Or, and then I also did the math of if I hire someone to build me this site with the whatever, that cost more than what I would be paying that person than the 10% Substack takes. And all I have to do with Substack is literally show up, write, and send it. Like, I do nothing else on the back end, on the infrastructure end. I don't have to figure out payments. I don't have to figure out, like, okay, when somebody's card gets declined, like all that stuff. And if I ever have a technical issue, I just CC support at Substack and they can help. So I think that it makes sense for some people to go ahead and hire someone and do a site and figure out payments. It does not yet make sense for me. But I also kind of like the fact that I know the founders of Substack, they're great. If I ever have a problem, there's somebody to talk to and suggest things to. And also, like, God, what is public, what is not public? But, like, I think, so we recently hired somebody who's like legal support. So now if I'm writing an article and have a legal question, I don't have to go pay a lawyer. I can literally ping Substack and be like, can your lawyer look over this? So it's little things like that most people, it prevents reporters from leaving traditional media companies because they get all that support there. And I think what's smart about Substack is they're trying to recreate that, but for the independent creator. So here's all the infrastructure. Maybe in the future you'll have editors that you can go to. Maybe in the future you get like, health insurance, like things like that, that really help the individual person. But you can do it on your own. I just think that I'm not yet at $5 million a year, so it doesn't make sense for me to do it all myself.
Awesome, makes sense. Thank you so much. And if you don't mind me jumping in with another question, could you go into a little bit more detail about that CCing the legal team? Like, did they review the content that goes out to make sure it's not, violating anything? Or
I have not used it, so I can't speak. But I know, oh my gosh, Alex. What is his last name? I'm blinking. But no, the person has been used as a resource. I think it's just, hey, look over this piece to make sure that everything's, because when you're an independent writer, obviously the big like negative is that you don't have your editors anymore. You don't have a legal team to review it. Like for Fortune, when I would write a big story for the magazine or something, somebody was looking over that. Like it wasn't just going out. Now you can publish anything, which can be dangerous, but it can also, like, if you have the right team like Substack around, you can just ask the legal team for help. I think they review and they answer your question and they give you like legal advice.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, great. Christina, I know we've got a question from the Zoom. Polina, just so you know, we also have a Zoom on the satellite for people who can't have access to Clubhouse. Christina, will you be able to ask the question from the Zoom? Right, I guess we have another Clubhouse mute button there. In that case, we'll move on to Mike. Mike, why don't you ask your question first?
What's up, Mike?
Hey, Polina, how are you doing?
Good. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces from the internet.
It's good to move from Twitter to Clubhouse.
Yeah, it's a step in the right direction.
Exactly. It's definitely more personal. So I want to talk storytelling and process for a minute. So how much of your like storytelling is you kind of know the direction of the story, you feel like you have a good sense of that before sitting down to write versus figuring it out kind of as you're writing?
Yeah. Oh, storytelling is such a weird, like, personal thing. It's so different for every single person. Like, when I tell people that I actually, a lot of times when I'm writing an article, I've always been this way. I typically know how I want to end it. So I start with the end first and then do like the middle or whatever. I look at a piece of writing like a puzzle. So there are all these elements. How do I like stitch them together in a way that flows and makes sense? So I don't write the traditional way from the beginning to end and then like tweak in between. But what I do is like when it's something before I start writing, I've probably been thinking about it for a day or two, no matter what it is. And so I'll be on a walk and I'm like, oh, yes, like that goes there. And then I start kind of like piecing it together in my head. Also, one weird thing that happens when you've been a reporter for so long is that when you're in everyday conversation, you hear something, somebody says something, you hear it, and you're like, damn, that's a good quote. But like, obviously, you're not writing it you're not writing a news article, but it does help spark like, that's an interesting idea. And then because you're more aware, you start asking more questions, you develop new ideas, and then by the time you sit to write, it's already been like marinating. You just have to wait. One of my editors at Fortune actually explained this really well. He basically said, like, what's the difference between the marinara sauce you buy at Whole Foods or whatever at the grocery store and the marinara sauce that like your grandmother makes? Your grandmother's sauce cooks all damn day. So the difference is like you gotta let it like simmer, you gotta think about it, you gotta like massage it a little bit. You can't just be like, all right, I'm gonna tell this story and like force it. It's like a 2-day process.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually think that is more the traditional way of storytelling. So appreciate your take and antidotes.
Of course.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right, Austin.
Polina.
What's up?
Hey, it's so good to see or to hear from you. For everybody that's here, Polina and I went to college together, and it's been a joy, Polina, following your career over the last 10 years. The funny thing is, since you and I have spoken last couple of years ago, what you don't know is that for the last year and a half, I too have been running a newsletter-based business, and yeah, and
I'm gonna sign up now. Cool.
It's been a wild ride and a lot of fun, and there's a lot of stuff that I wish I knew at the beginning that I know now, but I'm sure there's a lot of folks that are listening here that might be curious about starting their own journey into the newsletter world. And I'm always very fascinated to hear from others that have been successful in this field what their first pathway was. It's always such a struggle to know that pathway. It's the classic funnel, you know, what's your pathway to the first 10 readers, the first 100, the first 1,000? And what's the most effective way of finding those people, whether you're sharing stuff on
Sorry, all rebooting.
Okay, I'm just gonna move to New York. I bought this like camera. He was living in a really shitty apartment, but he didn't care because he wanted to like do something else. And this is what I tell every single person who starts something is that rules are awesome. Structure is your best friend. Like people who think that creative people are just like unstructured thinkers and just wake up in the morning with motivated, they found their muse and they're so excited to take on the day. It's like not what happens ever. I never wake up like I can't wait to write. Like maybe once in a blue moon, but it's not every day. So basically, Brandon said, I'm gonna create rules for myself. 10,000 photos of strangers in a year. And the reason that was a good rule is because it forced him, he broke it down. Okay, 10,000 photos, 1 year. How many photos do I need to take today, etc. But the point of it is he knew that creating a great volume of work will naturally force you to get better. And so once he started doing it, he started posting on Facebook. And at first, like, by the way, he wasn't a trained photographer. He wasn't good by, society's measure, but he like kept going. And over time, he was like, wait a second. I noticed that this person on Facebook really liked it. When I put a little quote under the picture of the stranger. And then he was like, oh, maybe people aren't enjoying these because of the photo. Maybe they like them because of the quote. Then he was like, oh, I had a really nice chat with this lady. I'm just going to do a little kind of like a little bit more, a little longer of a caption, not just a quote. And then that exploded. And Brandon's the person who always says, I interviewed him for the profile recently, and he said, when the wind is blowing right, I'm going right. I don't care if I've picked up. He started writing a book, and he was like, no, the wind is blowing in the direction, so I'm going to do a 37-part series of Tanqueray on Facebook. Like, you just have to pay attention, and the way you can't. For me, if I had started the profile with the idea of this is going to be a business, I would have approached it way differently than I did. Because I didn't approach it that way, I did it for something for myself and for my family and friends. It turned out that I have pretty good taste, and the things that are interesting to me and people like myself are probably going to be interesting to other curious people. So, like I said earlier, you can't really plan for success. Your first subscribers are probably going to be family and friends. But like Austin, like you just said it in this Clubhouse, I'm sure you'll get a few subscribers from this, right? Like James Clear always says, you can increase your luck just by telling people about it, like about what you're doing. And you find that the more you talk about it, the more like these little serendipitous moments will happen, and it will. Your network will grow bigger and bigger.
All of that is so true, so true. Especially what you say just about doing things even when you're not good. Just the practice, the craftsmanship. That's really kind of what that gets at. It's the craftsmanship, getting better over time. Like it's a necessary function of doing the same thing again and again and again.
Exactly.
You will always get better at it. Absolutely. So good to hear from you, Polina. Thanks.
Yeah, you too. By the way, I know it's over 4, but I want to answer more questions if you guys have them.
That'll be great, Polina. Actually, so we have 3 more people with questions. So in my best effort, I think I'm gonna let them all 3 to ask the question at the same time. If you are okay, and then you can do the closing statement, picking whatever you want to answer. Would that work?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Christina, you go first with the Zoom question.
Hey, Polina. So nice to hear from you.
You too.
Hope all is well. So we have a question from Shamus from the Zoom. She's from Saudi. She's from Saudi Arabia, and they're asking the best way to monetize a newsletter. Like, is there a mix? Like, is there a message to promoting your newsletter?
So I would say try to be additive. Oh, sorry. Wait, am I supposed to wait until all the questions are asked? Alice,
yeah, sorry. All right. So I will help to remember the question. And then next, Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, hey Polina.
Hey.
How you doing?
Good. How's it going?
Good. Hey, I'm just curious. So, like, you kind of talked about the entrepreneurial journey, going from Fortune and then branching out into your own and starting up the profile. I'm curious if you've seen your passion shift away from writing and more towards the strategy and, for lack of a better term, like business side of things. And if it has, or if it hasn't, either way, I guess, like, what are you most excited about right now with the profile?
Awesome. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, and the last one, Kuzman, go ahead. Osman, sorry.
Yes, my dad and my mom, they have been entrepreneur, and they work for themselves, and I still have it on my head since I was a kid, but I never able to start something for myself. And more I grow up, more I think that I want to work for myself, and I want to do something for myself. And this is every day what I sleep with it and wake up with it.
Awesome. All right. Should I start, Alice?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. For the Zoom question, so I would say if you want to monetize something, you should aim to be additive, not exclusionary. So, like, I've been sending the profile for 3 years for free. I wasn't all of a sudden about to be like, okay, guys, like, shutting the doors. Now you have to strict paywall. You have to pay if you want to get access to this stuff. I could have done that, but I had seen one too many media companies do that with a hard paywall where, like, it wasn't worth that. That's not how you build trust. What I find in the analytics is that when somebody signs up for the profile, it typically takes them 3 to 4 weeks of receiving it to convert to paid. So that means that they're testing it, right? They're looking at it. They're like, oh, do I like her writing? Do I like her tone? Is she sending it on time every week? And is there interesting content that I'm willing to pay for? Always aim to have something for people as a free taste sampling menu that they can look at, they can decide if they like it, and then pay for it. It's very hard to ask people to pay for something up front without ever giving it like a test ride before. But when I say be additive, not exclusionary, I mean, like, the people who had been with me since day one of the profile have always gotten the free version, which is the thing I promised them in the beginning, 8 to 9 curated long-form articles. If you want to support me beyond that, you get 2 extra sections in the daily email and 1 newsletter every Wednesday, and invites and, like, whatever. I try to think of, when you think of a subscription or a payment system, think about it as a membership. For me, people pay $50 a year, but over time, I've made them the promise that I'll keep adding things for that membership so that they feel like, oh my God, I am ripping this girl off. Like, she is giving me so much content that I feel like I'm paying less than $1 a week for this. It's worth it. So that's the feeling you want to spark in your consumer or reader. And then Kate, so in terms of the question was, since leaving Fortune and starting the profile, do you have more of like an attraction to business and strategy than you did before? That is the key question, because it's the one thing I struggle the most with. Like one part of my brain is very creative, the other should be more logical, and I don't know that it is, but it has forced me to think in ways I had never thought before, because I had always thought like a writer. I never had to think about, oh, how do I make money? How do I grow this? But the truth is, like, so like, let's say I'm like, I want to do this project for the profile that'll take me 3 days of just writing and nothing else. And then you ask yourself, okay, but like, if I do that, is that going to help grow the profile? Because if it's not, who cares how beautiful and high quality the thing you created is if nobody's going to see it? So it breaks my heart to see so many people that I know creating these beautiful things, these high quality things, and then they have no audience. You have to iterate every single day and produce something that gives people a taste of it. And so for me, I think the business mindset is still getting there, but luckily I've surrounded myself